Chapter 16 of Blackbeard, Buccaneer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Beeswax Candle. Blackbeard, Buccaneer by Ralph D. Paine. Ned Rackham's plans go much amiss. The armed brigantine had been out several days on the voyage to Virginia when a vessel was sighted hull down. Captain Welsby and Colonel Stewart decided to edge over and take a look at the stranger, although they were not anxious to engage an enemy of heavier metal. If, however, this should happen to be Blackbeard and the Revenge, they were in no mood to avoid him, despite the odds. After an hour of sailing in a strong breeze, it was seen that this other vessel was a small merchantman, which shifted her course as though to shake off pursuit.
"They take us for a pirate,"
chuckled Captain Welsby.
"I have no wish to scare 'em, poor souls. They will feel easy as soon as we bring the wind abeam."
He was about to give the order when Joe Hawkridge, gunner's mate, called to Jack Cockrell, standing his watch at the helm.
"Remember the snow I told you of? Yonder is the same rig and tonnage, alike as it is peas in a pod."
Jack spoke to the shipmaster, who summoned Joe to the quarterdeck. The boy was confident that this was the New England coasting vessel in which Ned Rackham and his pirates had appeared off Cherokee Inlet and had carried the marooned seamen from the Sandy Key.
"A brown patch in the big main topsail, and the bowsprit steeved more than ordinary," said Joe. "Tit for tat, Captain Welsby. Your men can have the fun of jamming them in the forecastle. You won't find me or Jack helping these piccaroons to break out."
"No fear of that," sternly spoke the shipmaster. "They shall make their exit with a taut rope and a long drop when I deliver them in Virginia."
It was to be gathered that the bold Ned Rackham had failed in his desperate enterprise of capturing a larger ship, and that he was probably cruising up the coast in hopes of rejoining Blackbeard. The Snow had too few guns to cope with the King George brigantine, which could throw a battering broadside. As soon as identification was certain, Captain Welsby hauled to windward to hold the weather gauge, and Colonel Stewart called the men to quarters. The Plymouth Adventure hands were disappointed that they would be unable to pay their own grudge. They had no doubt that Ned Rackham would strike his colours without a battle. The King George ran close enough for Captain Welsby to shout through the trumpet.
"The Snow ahoy! Send your men aboard or I'll sink you. No tricks, Rackham. Lively now."
They saw the men running to cut the boat lashings and struggle to launch the boats from the deck. Ned Rackham, handsome and debonair, stared coolly at the brigantine, but gave no sign that he had heard the ultimatum. With a shrug, he walked across the poop, glanced up at the British ensign which flew from his main truck, and made no motion to pull it down.
"Blow your matches, boys,"
roared Colonel Stewart from his station in the waist of the King George.
5 minutes' grace, no more."
Captain Welsby said to wait a little. The pirates were endeavouring to quit the Snow, and presently Rackham appeared to change his own purpose. No longer ignoring the King George, he doffed his hat in a graceful flourish and bowed with a mocking obeisance. Then he strolled to the cabin hatch and went below, presumably to get a change of clothing or something of the sort. But he failed to reappear, and his men were in a frenzy of haste, with one boat already in the water. So incensed was Colonel Stewart by the insolent refusal of Ned Rackham to strike his colours in token of surrender, that he gave orders to fire at the mainmast and try to bring it down. An instant before the starboard battery thundered, the Snow seemed to fly upwards in a tremendous explosion. The masts were flung out of her and the hull opened like a shattered basket. So violent was the shock that men were thrown to the deck of the King George, and she quivered as though her bows had rammed a reef. Black smoke spouted as from a crater, and debris rained down on a boiling sea. A few survivors, scorched or half stunned, were clinging to bits of wreckage and wailing for succour. Where the Snow had floated was a discoloured eddy, broken timbers, a lather of dirty foam. Captain Jonathan Welsby picked himself up, rubbed a bump on his head, and gazed wildly at the tragic scene. Collecting his wits, he exclaimed,
"That'd be like Ned Rackham, to blow up the ship sooner than be taken and hanged. More than likely had the train all laid to the powder barrels." "He saved us a lot of trouble," said Colonel Stewart as he climbed to the poop. "A fellow of iron will and courage, this Rackham, by all accounts. I have conceived a respect for him." "I forgive him his sins," replied the skipper. "Now, lads, boats away and fish up those dying wretches."
Joe Hawkridge emitted a jubilant whoop and dived over the rail without waiting for a boat. He had caught a glimpse of a feeble swimmer whose square, solid features and bushy brows were familiar. It was Peter Toby, the carpenter's mate, who had befriended him on the quay, and who had set adrift that miraculous cask of food and water. A few strokes, and Joe was at his side, clutching him by the neckband and towing him toward the King George like a faithful retriever. Ropes were flung to them, and Joe saw his good friend safely aboard before he went up the side. The carpenter's mate was both burned and bruised, but his hurts were not grievous, and he was able to drag himself aft with Joe as a crutch. "My own particular prize, sir, by your gracious leave," said Joe Hawkridge, addressing Captain Welsby. "This is Mr. Peter Toby, a poor, faint-hearted pirate like me. May I have him to keep, sir?"
"Bless me, there'll be no pirates left to hang," was the quizzical reply. "Master Cockerell's adopted you, and I am ordered to be kind to Bill Saxby and Tribble Rogers if I meet up with him."
"That's the whole list, sir. Ask Jack Cockerell. You can string the rest of the bloody pirates to the yardarm for all we care. Do I get exemption for this Peter Toby?"
"What is your verdict, Colonel Stewart?" asked the captain. "I heard the tale from Hawkridge," answered the brusque but generous soldier. "The carpenter's mate has won my allegiance. What say you on your own behalf, Peter Toby?"
The blistered, singed survivor touched a hand to his forehead and respectfully responded.
"Carpenter by trade and nature, and all this was. I never see one happy day of pirating, nor did I shed the blood of any human creature. With a bench and tools, you'll find me a proper handyman in Charlestown."
"That clinches it," cried Colonel Stewart. "I should call it a crime to hang an artisan like Peter Toby. Your prize is awarded you, Hawkridge. See that he is well cared for."
"First booty that was ever handed me from a sinking ship," said Joe. "Come along, Master Toby, and roll into my bunk."
"Verily, I was cast and bred upon the waters when I gave that cask to the wind and tide," devoutly murmured the carpenter's mate as he limped below with his new owner. No more than a dozen other pirates were rescued alive, and several of these expired soon after they were lifted aboard the brigantine. This is the only sensational incident of the coastwise voyage to the James River. Comfortably quartered, and with no more work than was wholesome, Jack Cockerell and Joe Hawkridge thought it a holiday excursion after their previous adventures at sea. In the roadstead of the James were 2 men-of-war, small frigates flying the broad pennant of the Royal Navy. A conference was held in the cabin of the senior officer, to which Captain Welsby and Colonel Stewart were invited. The latest advices made it seem certain that Blackbeard still lurked off the coast of the Carolinas. Planters had reported seeing his ship in Pamlico Sound, and it was also learned that he had been in communication with the disloyal Governor Eden at Bathtown. A letter had been intercepted, in writing of the governor's secretary, and addressed to Captain Teach, which included these words: "I have sent you 4 of your men. They are all I can meet with about town. Be upon your guard." This is readily construed to mean that Blackbeard was in haste to recall such of his crew as had strayed ashore. At the council of war in the frigate's cabin, a proclamation was read. It offered a handsome reward for the capture of Captain Edward Teach, dead or alive, and lesser rewards for other pirates. It was the decision that the 2 frigates were unhandy for cruising inshore. Therefore officers and men would be chosen from them to fill the complements of 2 sloops, light and active craft which would be unhampered by batteries of cannon. They would be employed for boarding Blackbeard's ship, while the Charlestown brigantine, King George, should convoy them and engage in the attack if the depth of water should permit. The naval officer selected to command the sloops was Lieutenant Maynard, who went off to the King George to inspect her and make a call of courtesy. He was especially cordial to Master Cockerell and gunner's mate Joe Hawkridge, laying aside the stiff dignity of naval rank. To his persuasive argument that they enter the royal service with promise of quick promotion, they turned a deaf ear, though they were wonderfully taken with him.
He was a gentle, soft-spoken young man with a boyish smile, who blushed when pressed to talk of his own exploits against the Spanish, the Dutch, and the French in Britannia's wooden walls. His own questions were mostly about Blackbeard's fighting quality. Would he make a stand against disciplined tars who were accustomed to close in hammer and tongs? Joe Hawkridge answered to this. "I ne'er saw him in action against the king's ship, and all his wild nonsense is apt to delude you into thinking him a drunken play-actor. But you'll never take him alive, so long as those bandy legs have strength to prop him up." "I look forward to meeting him with a great deal of pleasure. It may be my good fortune to measure swords with him," observed Lieutenant Maynard. Joe Hawkridge was puzzled by this gentle fire-eater with the complexion of a girl. Nothing could have been more unlike the ramping, roaring pirates of Blackbeard's dirty crew, who tried to terrify by their very appearance. After the lieutenant had returned to his frigate, Jack Cockerell remarked, "A most misleading man, Joe. Cannot picture him seeking the bubble reputation at the cannon's mouth, as Will Shakespeare saith." "Blackbeard will bite him in two," replied Joe. "He's too pretty to be risked in such a slaughter-pen. I own up to feeling squeamish on my own account, hardy pirate though I be." "This Lieutenant Maynard is welcome to measure swords with Blackbeard," said Jack, "and I shall not quarrel with him for the honour. Pick me a pirate with a wooden leg, Joe, or one that still shakes with Spanish fever. My only chance of getting out with a whole skin is to lug a sack of flour under one arm and play the ghost of Jessie Strawn." Expeditiously, the brigantine and the two sloops sailed out of the James River to head for the North Carolina coast, and first raked the nooks and bays of Pamlico Sound. There was no intention of offering Blackbeard fair odds in battle. With men and vessels enough, it was resolved to exterminate him, like ridding a house of rats or other vermin. If he had gone out to sea, the pursuers would wait and watch for his return to his favourite haunts in these waters. There was every reason to believe, however, that he was concealed inshore, within easy distance of his friend Governor Eden. Failing to find him in Pamlico Sound, it was debated whether to cruise farther to the southward. Now, Master Jack Cockerell and his chum had said nothing to the officers concerning the treasure in the Cherokee swamp. They felt bound in honour not to reveal it without the consent of Bill Saxby and old Trimble Rogers, who were partners in the enterprise. Moreover, Lieutenant Maynard and the Virginia officers would feel bound to turn the treasure over to the Crown, or its representatives. Governor Eden of North Carolina would undoubtedly claim it as found within his territory, and this meant that he would steal most of it for himself. It thrilled the lads when Colonel Stewart told them that this provincial squadron would cruise as far as Cherokee Inlet before working to the northward again. Information had led the officers to believe that Blackbeard had lost many men by desertion while his ship lay at Bathtown and nearby. They had been roving about the plantations and making a nuisance of themselves, and seemed ready to quit their red-handed despot of a master. In this event, he might have sought his old hiding-place at the inlet sooner than risk a clash with the force which had been sent after him, and of which he had been warned by Governor Eden. Lieutenant Maynard scouted in advance with the two sloops, because there was small danger of their getting aground, and they could be moved along with oars if the wind failed. The brigantine kept further offshore, but within signalling distance. She was running within sight of the scattering barrier of low islands, when Captain Welsby summoned Joe Hawkridge and informed him. "You'll act as pilot, Joe, once we fetch sounding of the 12-fathom bank. The charter's faulty, as you know. Me and my mates are in strange waters with a mighty little elbow-room. You know the marks, I take it." "Aye, sir, that I do," answered Joe. "Then I stays aboard ship and missed the chance to go poking about with a cutlass. I'm all screwed up to terrible deeds, Captain Welsby, after a spell of mortal fear. And who takes care of Master Cockerell if he goes in a boat?" "His own lusty right arm, Joe. Avast with your melancholy. We must first catch this Blackbeard." Presently Joe Hawkridge footed up the main shrouds to scan the sea ahead, and to try and catch a glimpse of that sandy bit of exposed shoal on which he had been marooned. This would enable him to find the entrance to the outer channel, and so con the brigantine in from seaward. While he shaded his eyes with his hand against the glare of the morning sun, one of the sloops hoisted a string of bright signal flags and fired 2 guns. The other sloop was seen to lower her topsail and wait for the King George to come up.
Joe Hawkridge climbed higher and found a perch where he could discern the spars of a vessel etched almost as fine as threads against the azure horizon. He was almost certain that the ship he saw was very close to that tiny key of which he had such unhappy knowledge. Soon he was able to perceive that the vessel's sails were furled. This was an odd place for an anchorage. His conjecture was confirmed when the King George passed close to the nearest sloop, and Lieutenant Maynard shouted, "Stranded, hard and fast, and she is deucedly like Blackbeard's brig." Scampering to the deck, Joe Hawkridge mustered his gun's crew as Jack Cockrell came running up to say, "Trapped on the very islet where he cast you and the other pirates. His chickens have come home to roost."
"Call me no pirate, or I'll stretch you with a handspike," grinned Joe. "'Tis a plaguey poor word in this company. Aye, Captain Ed'ard Teach has a taste of his own medicine. It'll get a worse dose this day than ever he served me."
End of chapter 16.